Welcome to another newbie training. Today's training is going to be about building capacity for engagement. The section of the law would be 116E 1 through 14. You know, when you think about parents enrolling their child in school, sometimes we don't think about the fact that the minute that happens, it becomes a shared responsibility for the home, the school, and the community to work together for the success of that child. So it's important that schools build the capacity of both the staff and the families to develop programs that are student-centered and family strengthening. Because what we're trying to do is to set up that child for success. So today we're going to focus on the compliance side of building capacity of both the staff and the parents to help that child be successful. So when you think about the purpose of the law, Katie, if you'll go ahead and move forward. If you think about the purpose of the law, you can kind of get overwhelmed because you kind of get stuck in the check boxes and it can be overwhelming. And if you're not careful, all these things that are required in law can become shelf documents. And before you know it, you're just doing it to meet the intent of the law, not to truly bring about change and increase student achievement. So let's remove those boxes and look at this next slide and look at the intent of the law. The policy is really about engaging parents, and the compact is about supporting student learning. And you can go through and look at all these and you begin to see that the purpose of the law, it wasn't about being overly burdensome, but it was truly building those relationships and building that capacity of the staff and the family to see those real opportunities that are out there. You know, one of the things that you would keep hearing about a lot is how we're moving from parent involvement to parent engagement. But what does that really mean? When you think of parent involvement back in the old days, you thought about doing to. With parent engagement, it's more about doing with. And that's really important because when you're doing to, you're assuming that you're the only one that has the knowledge. When you're doing with, home, school, family, community, all working together, you're recognizing that each person has something to bring to the table, that each person has something that will help that child be successful. So you're collaborative, you're doing it together. Section 116 is not intended to be burdensome, but we all know if there wasn't a law in place, some schools might not do parent and family engagement at all. But it's intended to be good practice. It's really about engaging families in helping their students do better. It's equipping both staff and parents to help that child in every way possible. So let's look at what building capacity is. But before we even start on this slide, I want to remind you that capacity equals potential. So when it comes to your staff and when it comes to even your parents, I want you to think about their potential. They may not know it now, but they have the potential to learn it. So building capacity is equipping parents and staff with skills that they might not have otherwise. It's training and mentoring that increases the skills of people. And then what's important, you've done this, you've equipped them, you've trained them. Now you want to create a sustainable infrastructure to meet the needs of parents to ensure achievement. So in other words, you want to create that sustainable infrastructure so when your people are gone, that's doing a great job, there's somebody there to take their place. And so that the program continues to be successful. So when you think about equipping parents, you're thinking about workshops, parent classes, things like Parent University, having model schools, offering programs specific to the needs of the parents and the staff. Training is you're providing guidance and support and mentoring both to the parents and staff again. And then creating that sustainable infrastructure is developing events and trainers to ensure that everybody is capable of helping. So you're going to work smarter, not harder. So So when we look at section 1116E, it simply says to ensure effective involvement of parents and to support a partnership among the schools, involving everybody. So that's what you want to think of. You're building the capacity for everybody, home, school, family, community. And why is that important? It really does tie back to the student because we want to increase student achievement. So we're going to start looking at each of these 14 components, and Shannon's going to get us started.
All right, well, good morning. I'm glad y'all heard us today. On this first video. Sorry, I was muted the whole time. So we'll start over again. So good morning, everyone. We're going to start looking at the shall statements that are in this section of ESSA. We all know that when we look at shall, those are definitely requirements that we must do. And so we have that in there, that shall equals must. So this first one is really just talking about how we're going to help parents understand those basics of state standards and state assessment, so they have an idea of what's going on in the classrooms each day, what those teachers are teaching and why they're teaching those things, as well as helping them understand and be able to see if their child is making progress when they say, okay, they're coming home and they're able to do this or they're not able to do this. How do they know if their child is making progress in those standards? On the next slide, we're going to look at some strategies and ways that we can start helping parents in building the capacity so they understand those things. And when I think about building capacity of parents, you know, really the first thing that comes to my mind is helping them understand what is being taught. That's, you know, why kiddos are going to school these days. So here's some suggestions on things that we can do to help them with that curriculum portion. We've all heard those things like, well, that's not the way it was taught when I went to school. And when we changed math standards a few years ago, I'm sure all of you remember hearing things like, why'd they change math? You can't change math, and those types of things. So helping them understand those state standards or those TEKS, the Texas Essential of Knowledge and Skills, and that's the basis of those STAR tests and how we create those STAR tests. One thing we need to think about is helping them understand by not using jargon or acronyms, which I just use, such as TEKS or STAR, so they have a better understanding of actually what's happening, but in layman's terms so they can understand it. And then again, another thing to consider is how are we sharing with parents how we are assessing kids on a regular basis throughout the year? Do they understand if they're a first grade parent, what does their reading level E really mean? Or what does that common district assessment really mean? They may not understand that that's really just a 6 weeks test and how they used to think about school. The next slide, we're just going to look at some other, continue to look at some strategies. I hit on this a little on the last slide, but as we provide parents with information and show them how they can help monitor students' progress, be thinking of how we build the capacity in our teachers and how they communicate with parents as well. A beneficial strategy could be to have parents involved in the development of those parent classes or those curriculum nights or activities that you're going to provide, so that the information that is shared with parents is meaningful. It really hits the needs and what they need to know. And so we're going to hit just a little bit later in this presentation some more ideas about building the capacity of teachers. So looking at some capacity in action, you're going to think of how do we share this information? And there's lots of ways that we can share information about curriculum with parents, such as open houses or grade level parent nights. But on this slide, you'll see one way, and that is a family reading night. These nights are designed to be a fun way to share information about reading and test taking. You can see some pictures on here about how schools are helping model strategies or provide samples of activities that parents can now take and do with their kids at home. Schools can consider partnering with outside companies to maybe provide some books or some phonics games or activities that parents can then also take home to work with students at home. Make sure that it's important to make sure that these events like family reading night, there's definitely an opportunity for two-way communication between your staff and your families. You can see in these pictures that some schools have created some theme nights along their family reading night. You can see some Dr. Seuss going on here. You see some community help and providing some books to the students when they come to those nights. Next is another example of some things you can do to share some curriculum. This one's a math carnival. I like how they use the term math carnival rather than math night, just to create some excitement. They brought some games, as you can see in some of the pictures, which are a great way to teach basic math skills and help parents feel capable of teaching as they're just playing games. You can consider activities that span different grade or ability levels with cards or dice, some logic puzzles or some real life problem solving, and get kids and older kids or community members involved to help at these tables. You can see on the next slide, we have some other pictures of kids playing games. You can see they're using some pretty simple things, paper created games and cups. So these nights are just a creative time to talk about curriculum and how teachers and students are applying skills in a fun and real life situation and how they can be practiced at home. All right, we're moving on.
All right, so our next shall is to provide materials and trainings to help parents to work with their children and their children and improve their children's achievement. So if there's anything that we have learned from this whole COVID experience is just that parents do want to learn. They want to see their children succeed. And they asked over and over again, how can I help my parent or my child? How can I help my child? And so that's where we come in. We want to really provide them the opportunity when it comes to literacy training or technology training to make sure that they feel well equipped and they don't feel inadequate when it comes to their child's education, because they want to be that huge part of their education as well. Here's a couple of strategies that you can use when it comes to building their capacity in terms of training your parents. You can offer classes for parents in literacy development or use of technology to help them with their children, provide training that parent and children can attend together, establish accessible and convenient parent resource centers, coordinate with community organizations to provide practical classes for parents. So this is one of the things I really wanted to touch on. It's really important that we can coordinate with our community because there's tons of resources out there for parents, whether it's at your community college, they may be providing ESL classes that could help build your parents up, or have literacy classes as well. It's also important that you seek out resources. Like we've said before, we want to work smarter, not harder. USDA has a lot of resources when it comes to trying to help your parents feel better about technology and training them in those resources. So I really encourage you to check out those resources, as well as our PFE website on our Region 16. We have tons of resources that parents can use, even activities that they can use at home with their children as well. And here are some examples of building capacity in action. We really want to target all families, and this is done by different opportunities and delivered in different manners. We want to provide opportunities like workshops that help them understand what their children are learning or help them grow in math literacy and homework. We want to offer student volunteer time to teach younger students how to tutor younger children. This is where learning really does happen, when you give those opportunities, not just for parents, but for the child to teach others around them and really feel empowered. We also want to partner with the communities, like we said before. This will help just make things a little bit easier and provide more resources like materials that maybe you're struggling getting your hands on. There's a lot of people in your community who really want to help. You just have to offer them the opportunity to help. And now I'm going to hand it over to Terry.
This next section is talking about educating your teachers on how to work effectively with parents. And to be honest with you, this is an overlooked section oftentimes. Oftentimes schools think it's the teachers that always need to be taught, the parents that always need to be taught, when in reality, it's the teachers, it's the staff as well. If you think back, you were probably never given a class in college about how to work effectively with parents. So the law is saying that it's the school's responsibility to train up that staff, to train them how to work with these parents effectively. So some ways that you can do that is to just hone their skills as effective communicators, to work with your staff on what effective communication means. Train them in a systematic and ongoing manner. In other words, it should happen more than once. At every staff meeting, maybe just bring up one skill to discuss. And also invite your parents in to have them talk about the importance of communication. Have your parents talk about homeschool partnerships, what it is that they would like to see from the teachers. And one thing we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute is these community field trips. So let's look at a few more strategies. We've already talked a little bit about the importance of communication, so I'm not going to go through that one again. Develop with the parents. I think when you're doing these trainings, get the parents involved. You're going to see later that it's in the maze rather than the must, but I think it's a critical piece. You want to hear what the parents need and then train your teachers accordingly. Share some best practices. Allow the teachers to visit some other schools. Allow them to attend some conferences and some trainings to teach them how to work effectively with those parents. So one of the things I want to show you on this next slide, is a link that we have to a PowerPoint that we've developed at the request of TEA. And it's a PowerPoint that will help the school train their staff. It's a starting place. It's a stepping stone. So I want to be very clear that it doesn't have all the answers, but it's a great place for a school to start to meet this intent of the law. You know, if you notice on this little blackboard, it says, I don't have all the answers. I need training to effectively work with parents and families. Most teachers would readily admit they need some help in this area. So it's the responsibility of the administrators to make sure that that training is taking place. So I talked to you a minute ago about doing some neighborhood tours. Seeing is believing. Oftentimes the teachers have no clue about the neighborhoods in which their students live. So I think it's very important to conduct these neighborhood tours. So you get the teachers all on a bus and you just head down to the neighborhoods in the school's community. Walk the streets, talk with the parents, talk with the students, share information, have some handouts to give out. The one thing that I would want to caution you is don't take the bus tour and just drive through looking. It almost carries a message that you're scared to get out or, you know, kind of treating them like monkeys in a zoo. That's not what this is about. It is actually touring the neighborhood, talking to them. If you see kids in the park, get out and talk to them, throw a Frisbee with them, throw a football, have something to give to them. But it allows you to see the neighborhoods in which your students live. So I think seeing truly is believing. At this time, Skip's going to cover number 4 with you.
Katie, we have a question from Maribel. Can you go back a couple slides? She wanted to see that tiny URL. Can you go back real quick? But we can make sure, Maribel and all of you, that you receive the link to this PowerPoint that Terry referred to. So this PowerPoint will go online, but we can also forward to you the link to that specific PowerPoint, that training PowerPoint. All right. Hopefully that helps you. Thank you very much there, Katie. This is kind of a content-heavy presentation in some ways, but there's a lot to building capacity. But one thing I really want to affirm is kind of what Terry had said earlier as she introduced the idea of building capacity, is that if you're going to have an effective building capacity strategy or approach as you work with your staff and as you work with your parents, you need to have a mindset that says, first of all, I believe, I believe that parents really do have a dream for their children, that parents really have something that they expect their kids to be exceptional in some way, that they have a dream that the kids will be able to accomplish more than they were able to accomplish. Hopefully you believe that about your parents. Secondly, that you believe also about your parents, that they do have the capacity to develop skills, that they have the ability, that they have the potential. Just like we talk about that with our students, we need to talk about that, think about that with our parents, that they have the potential to develop necessary skills so they can be partners with you as we work together to help our kids be successful. So just wanted, that's my little intro or my little soapbox thing there. But so we talk about how it's important as we develop our building capacity activities that we, to the extent feasible and appropriate. Now that is not a get out of jail free card. That is not a pass. It was like, oh, it's not feasible. It's not appropriate. I don't need to do it. Well, you need to consider your options. And so the idea is that we want to coordinate and integrate our parent involvement programs and strategies with other federal, state, and local programs. We want to work together. What's important is that we need to get out of our silos. We need to pick up our calendars. We need to go across the hall. We need to talk to our colleagues. We need to plan together and decide, hey, what can we do together? What kinds of events and activities can we do cross programs so that we are working together, so that we actually being respectful of parents' time, so that we're using our time effectively. So how could we work together? And so this isn't just an option. This is a requirement that we really need to work towards that goal. We need to work towards that end. And we've already heard in other trainings that the meetings that we do with parents need to be at a convenient time and a convenient place. Go on, next slide, please. And so whether you're talking about transition trainings, whether you're talking about orientation trainings, whatever it might be, whether it's from pre-K to K or kindergarten to elementary to middle school to high school, again, you want your programs to work together. How can we work together so that we're using our time effectively? How can we work together so that we're using our energy and that we are actually working together? They call it, what do they call it? Synergy, if I recall correctly, that was the word. We don't hear that word too much anymore, but that we are able to accomplish more. We're able to multiply our success when we work together. And so let's be sure we work together, whether it's preschool programs, whatever it might be, to provide to parents materials, information, resources, training, and that we are working together so they get the information they need. So hopefully Title I Part A will work with Title I Part C and Title I Part 3, or I'm sorry, Title III Part A and McKinney-Vento, that will work, and other programs will work cross programs for the benefit of our families. Next slide, please. And one idea here that occurred to me is one of the things that have happened this spring and summer, and I guess even now into the fall, that a lot of schools and districts are doing mobile hotspots. Great idea, responding to a very real need, but maybe, just maybe, those hotspots could be on a bus, and maybe that bus could become a mobile parent involvement center, a parent resource center. I realize parent resource centers aren't required, but it's a great idea. It's a best practice, but maybe make it a mobile parent resource center with materials and resources that parents need to know. Maybe a computer is going to be on there that a parent can use. Maybe it'll be a staff person on there that has as part of their task is to actually connect with parents. So just think outside the box. And beyond that, we have to get outside of our box and talk to one another, work together, work with our colleagues as partners, and then together we work with our families as partners who are dreamers for their kids and who have the ability to learn new skills. So now I'm going to pass this on to Matthew, who's going to talk to you about the importance of providing information in language parents understand.
Good morning, everybody, and I'll make sure I speak a language that everybody on here understands. So when we talk about this strategy, we're talking about the format and the language. What we want to make sure is that there's two things we want to focus on. We want to make sure that our communications are accessible to everybody. So that can be offering them in a different mixture of formats. It can be online formats, it can be text formats. But the other thing that we want to make sure is that when we send out those communications, as Shannon mentioned earlier, try to avoid acronyms and jargon. And I know that we're very guilty of doing that often, but when you do have to use them, make sure that you explain them. The other thing in this statute, it says to the extent practicable. When we say to the extent practicable, we're talking about making a good faith effort. Go out and explore, research some different ways to be able to provide this communication to parents in a language that they can understand. And so we want to look at some different ways. And in the next slide, we're going to see some of the ways that maybe we need to offer these communications. This is what our newsletter looks like. And can anybody out there read Korean, or do you understand German? Well, see, that's how our parents feel when they see something only communicated to us in English. It really affects their ability to be connected to our school. And so when we send it out, just as all of us were confused when we first saw the Korean scripting, and then we're still confused when we were presented communication in a language we didn't understand, we have to go out and try to find some ways to be able to provide this. But we have to be very careful. And I'm going to show you in the next slide one of the pitfalls of being over-reliant on some of our tools. So here I use Google Translate to translate a colloquialism. And the colloquialism that's used here in Texas and in the southern states, it says, we're going to have a knee-slapping good time. Well, let me translate this for you in Spanish as Google Translate did verbatim. Vamos a pasar un buen rato palmeando las rodillas. The way that that context is communicated to a Spanish-speaking parent who does not understand English, who has never heard this colloquialism, is that my child is going to participate in an activity where they will be slapping their knees, or they will be slapping the knees of other children, or other children will be slapping their knees. And so to a Spanish-speaking parent, particularly an immigrant parent, it's going to instill a little bit of confusion or fear in them. They may hold their child back from school that day because they don't want their child to be hurt, nor do they want their child to get in trouble for hurting somebody else. And so something like that can cause unnecessary confusion. You may even get a phone call from the parent asking, why is my child going to be assaulted at school today? How is this fun? So be very careful with apps. One thing to be particularly aware of is the more formal your document, be less reliant on translations apps like Google. And if you don't have that resource in your school to be able to provide translation for you, a great idea is to reach out into your community. The employer where those parents are working, there may be a liaison type employee who is bilingual that can help out with some of these things. If you do have to use them, have them proofread. Reach out to your ESC. That's a great opportunity for your LEAs to reach out to you and help build that rapport between all of you. But don't let this keep you from translating documents for your families. Don't let this keep you from providing interpreters. Sometimes this is the very best we can do. And as migrant families have told me in the past, just like we understand their broken English, they can understand our broken Spanish. Parents do have the ability to understand all of that. So again, like I said, identify people in your school and community who are skilled to translate or interpret for you. Involve parents. You may find out that you have a bilingual parent who can help you with some of this. Make sure that you send out questionnaires. Find out what are some of the language issues, and sometimes language may be accessibility. So reach out, find out that information. It's very important that we identify the needs of our families. And so now we're going to turn it over to Terry.
Let's do an activity at this point. You should.
Terry, can I interrupt for one thing first? Sorry about that. Sorry to interrupt Terry and Matthew. I want to add one other thing that Terry and I have discovered and been told about is that places of worship, a lot of places of worship have international ministries. And of course, as internationals move to our communities, they set up their own places of worship. And oftentimes the religious leader in that community of faith, they have the ability to provide translation services, or they know who can provide translation services. So access those kinds of opportunities in the community for additional support for translation. Sorry to interrupt. Just a thought.
No problem. Very good point. And also I want to point out that a lot of colleges have international students. I know that we use a Vietnamese student to translate our newsletters for us. So certainly look at that as well. What I'd like for you to do is just take a few seconds to look at this pictures. You see 8 images, and I want you to just very quickly study them and think about which one is the image that resonates most with you when you would think about authentic engagement. Would it be number 1, number 5, number 8? What is it that you would, which picture really resonates with you? Could I get 1 or 2 of you to chime in and say which image resonated with you very quickly?
I'll say something. This is
Hey,
Saul.
Cammie, how about you? Would you come on and share which one resonated? Oh,
Go ahead, Saul. I'll
oh,
wait.
okay, Saul, hit it.
I just jumped in.
Unmute
I didn't put
yourself,
it in
Saul.
there. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I just jumped in rather than posting it on the thing. I
Are you
maybe
ready to go?
Skipped a step. Number
Did
6.
Saul say something? Okay, I'm sorry. I was the one muting you, Saul, so I was trying to get you to unmute.
Okay.
Saul, could you repeat what you said again, because I missed it?
Okay, I was just saying that I just jumped in. I guess I skipped a step, but I will say number 6 because I'm seeing different things that are coming towards parents and families, and then as a community, they're raising that standard as they're going through by building capacity together.
Great, very good point. Somebody else, would someone else be willing to share? So I don't have to pick on Cammie?
Me, Claudia.
Yes, Claudia.
So I'm looking at number 3. It was in my first option, but the more I looked at it, I thought 3 kind of reminds me of like the Socratic method, you know, where everybody gets to speak and feed off each other. So it's kind of authentic versus scripted, you know? That's
Very
what I
good point. I've not heard it explained like that, so I like that. One more person.
I'll go ahead and jump in, Terry. I don't mind a bit. I agree with Saul on number 6. I just feel like it really symbolizes a group of people pushing in the same direction. So it's not just 1 or 2, and it kind of symbolizes working with the families and not working just in isolation or just they're working in solidarity and they have a common goal. So I just like the teamwork, I guess, visualized in 6.
Awesome. You know, the truth is, I've seen some of you put in the poll that you like 3, some like 7, some like 6. The bottom line is any of those pictures could work. They would resonate with someone. So the importance here to recognize it's not important that we all think the same. You're going to get, there's richness in opinions. There's richness in diversity. So any of those pictures could certainly resonate with someone. But the truth is all of them involve some type of teamwork. We've gone through this first section and we've looked at all of the must. We've looked at how language translation's required. We've looked at the importance of training your teachers to work effectively with parents. We've looked at how important it is that they understand all the assessments and the curriculum that their children are involved in. We've looked at the importance of providing materials to help parents be successful. I would say of all of the Mays that probably schools are doing the least effective job in is providing those materials to really help those parents help their children. And as Skip talked about, coordinating with other programs to be successful. These are all must, and I've got to tell you, sometimes I have to get a chuckle because a lot of people will say, can we just do 2 trainings a year? You just saw 5 must. And in order to accomplish those, there's an expectation that there are going to be multiple trainings throughout the year. If you want to sharpen the saw of the parent, then you've got to provide the trainings. That's just it in a nutshell. We are going to move now into the Mays, and I want to point out that May equals best practice. And in my opinion, and not that it counts for much, but in my opinion, it's during these best practices that the best programs are built. If you really, truly want to have a culture of care, if you really want to have a program that's successful, then you've got to delve into these Mays. The first one we're going to talk about is one that aligns to what I spoke about earlier. The law requires that you train your teachers on how to successfully partner and work with parents. And I said at that time that I thought it was good practice to involve those parents in that development. So that's what this slide here is talking about. It's that best practices that takes a program from good, better to great. And that's what we're looking for. Some strategies that you can do that is encourage your parents to share ideas, to talk about what they think would be relevant in a staff training, and then have them help actually develop that training. And then utilize your staff meetings, your faculty meetings to invite parents up or community members to share some information, to share some updates. Again, it's all of us need training. All of us need to increase our learning. All of us need to sharpen our saw. And it's important to understand that parents have something good to contribute and teachers have something good to contribute, but also community members do as well. So let's look at one more set of strategies. And we've kind of already talked about most of these, is providing opportunities for the parents to have input and sharing resources with the parents to ensure that they all know what their rights are, their responsibilities, that they know opportunities and how to access those opportunities. So you might want to designate a PFE team. Somebody's going to talk about a PAC if you wanted to have a parent advisory council later, but have some kind of team that really does help schools be successful. One of the things that I've enjoyed at our expos is, for example, I'm going to use Taylor ISD. John really talked about having parents that just took over a part of his programs. So in other words, he was empowering them to be successful. And he also was able to take a load off of his plate. So train those parents to be mentors, train those parents to be leaders, and it allows a lot more to be accomplished. And then, of course, build in those evaluation tools. It's important that you measure for success, and then you look to see what's working, get rid of those things that aren't, and move forward with those things that are. So at this point, Shannon's going to talk to you a little bit more about some of the Mays.
I hate to say this, but I'm going to become the it appears today. So I apologize for that. But I just received an email the other day that I want to share with you. I don't want to read the email, but just the content of the email was that a school district asked me if we had a training material for their staff. And we said, yeah, the PowerPoint that we talked about, Terry talked about earlier. So yeah, I forwarded the PowerPoint, gave them the link to PowerPoint. They said, hey, that's great. But they asked if I had it in Spanish. No, I don't have it in Spanish. But they said, and I said, well, so why do you need it in Spanish? It's for educators. And they said, what we're going to do, we're going to share this PowerPoint with our parents first. We're going to get their input about what needs to be emphasized, what needs to be less emphasized, and how we can then tweak this PowerPoint so it really fits the needs for the training of our staff. I thought, man, that's a great idea. So I just want to share that. I thought that was a really cool idea of how to involve parents in the development of your training material for your staff. Okay, back to Shannon.
All right, and I unmuted myself this time. We're getting better at this. I keep forgetting all the time. Anyway, so this next May that we're going to talk about today talks about providing necessary literacy training, which Katie talked about earlier, and that it is required to provide those trainings and materials to parents in the area of literacy. She shared some ideas about adult learning, such as ESL classes or GED or computer classes. But this May focuses on the school's ability to use their federal funding to pay for those trainings or pay for setting up things like resource centers. So that's what this May is looking at. The next slide, you've heard these things shared with throughout our training by different people today. But when we look at some of these strategies, you're going to hear the same things on this slide as well. So if we're going to use our funds to provide trainings to parents or resources, we need to look at what they need. So consider evaluating the need for the training, using parent surveys, or creating outreach groups to get the parents involved in helping us decide how is the best way to use these funds. What is the real need for the trainings that we're going to provide to parents? So get them involved. It could just be that they need to be provided with some practical resources that they can use at home. So this funding could be used in that way. Again, talk to those parents and reach out to them. And, what do they have at home? What do they not have at home that could be useful for them? And last, that funding, it can be very different from one LEA to the next. Some schools get a lot of title funding, some get very little. So we're going to have to consider how tight is our budget and then reach out to those organizations. You've heard us talk about really finding places in the community that may help your school or your LEA provide those needed things when that budget is really, really tight. So consider partnering with some local faith-based organizations, colleges or training centers that may be willing to provide some services for those parents. You can see in this picture that the use of those funds and trainings could look very different from one place to the next. So we just encourage you to be creative in how you use those funds to help build the capacity of both parents and families as a whole. When we look at our next May, we are again going to be talking about funding and how the school can pay reasonable and necessary expenses associated with those parent involvement activities. Necessary cost may be for transportation or for childcare, so the parents can attend those parent engagement activities or trainings. As always, when you're looking at using federal funds, make sure that this is a need that's been addressed in the campus needs assessment or written in the campus improvement plan. And if they're not in there and that you determine, hey, this is a need, make sure that those documents are updated to reflect how we're going to use those funds. So looking at those use of funds, some strategies that may be considered for transportation, there's a numerous ways that we can get creative and use some of these funds, such as providing parents with bus tokens or some type of reimbursement system that parents can use. Just be sure that if you are considering this may be something that you talk with your district about, having a written policy that you can share with parents prior to them paying these expenses. There have been things brought up in the past and some questions about schools providing transportation for parents via a school bus or another school vehicle. Those are definitely things that could be considered. Just definitely talk with your district support center and your transportation staff, as there could be some insurance liabilities, as parents may not actually be covered under the school's insurance. It may only be students. Those are definitely things that you could consider. Another suggestion, again, let's reach out to our community. Are there some community groups that have buses or transportation that they use to bring people to and from their places of worship, or a local community center that you could partner with to provide transportation to parents? The statute, the May, talks about providing childcare, which is very important when we think about bringing parents to trainings that we have. I don't know about you guys, but I remember there was a time between the age of about 2 years old and 4 years old that we rarely left our house, even to go out to eat, because having a toddler at times and taking them in public can be about as embarrassing as can be. Your frustration level is about to hear. So when we think about bringing parents onto campus and other parents, we're really wanting them to learn. We're wanting them to grow. If they're having to tote a 2-year-old who's throwing a mini meltdown on the floor, that doesn't happen as much. So consider how we can provide childcare to parents. We can, again, partner with community groups, your YMCA or places of worship that have volunteers that do this kind of thing on a regular basis, and how they can help you provide childcare, or even holding those parent meetings at alternate locations in the community that could help to provide childcare and transportation maybe at the same time. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Katie, and she's going to talk about our building capacity strategies and collaborate.
All right. So our next May is to train parents to enhance the involvement of other parents. And just like we want to empower them to be able to help their child at school, we also want them to grow and learn with each other. We want to provide them opportunities for them to be really successful and feel like they're successful and they've accomplished something. One of the biggest things to consider when it comes to training is to make sure that you take a needs assessment for your demographic, because you could have the best trainers, you could have the best program, but if you don't know what your parents need to be trained on or how they can improve in their capacity, then you won't get your parents there and your parents won't be successful. So really think about what your demographic is, what types of employment is around the area, the types of employment that's in the area, hours from local shifts if there's factories in your area, and even transportation, because you really want to make sure that you're having these training opportunities for your parents during hours that they can be there. And here's some examples of strategies when it comes to building capacity and training your parents to train others. You want to train parents to in turn train other parents, because that's when you know that they've really grown and they've really learned something. When they can produce other educated individuals from training that they have received, then you can see that the real learning is going on. Something that you can do in your area, it just depends on your LEA, is Parent University, and it's online. You can go to Parent University and there's 3 1-hour period classes. And then in those periods, there's 8 to 10 classes. And what these classes are is opportunities for parents to pick subjects on parenting or even on just different content areas like math and literacy. As far as funding for this, there is a cost. So again, this may be something that you can do or something that you cannot do. But if you can't afford something like Parent University, or it's not workable in your area, then get with people in your school or your LEA and see if you can set up programs. There's several districts who set up their own parent training programs in their district just based off of the needs of their parents. So it really just differs from district to district. If you do provide opportunities for parents, as far as training them to train other parents, do recognize them. They may have never received an accomplishment like this or a certificate. There's schools down south who will actually go to a college and have a ceremony that celebrates the parents and their learning. And it really makes them feel really special. So consider things like that. That'll get parents, and it'll get parents talking about their experience and getting more parents to come. One of the most important things is collaborate with your parents to develop the training. Get with them and see what they feel like the community needs. What do other parents around them need? Parents do talk to each other, just like children talk to each other. Parents talk to each other and try to figure out what's going on when they don't know what's going on. So make sure to get with your parents and see what's needed in your community. This is just kind of a neat little picture that we really liked. And it says, you're not a leader until you have produced another leader who can then produce another leader. So this is just going on what we just said just now. You want to make sure that your learning continues. You want to make sure that the person that you've trained continues to share the knowledge, because that's how your community grows. That's how the education in your community grows. So really try to find those opportunities to create those leaders. And then this next picture is just an example of different trainings that are held in the community. They can look different. They can be smaller classes, they can be one-on-one, or they could be group classes. Try to get with different resources in your community. Like Shannon mentioned, places of worship are good places. There's usually big enough classrooms or rooms to facilitate a training. So really look for those community members that are really wanting to work with parents in schools, and they're often willing to give you pretty much anything when it comes to resources. So now I'm going to turn it back over to, I believe, Terry. Skip, I'm sorry.
And this time I'm going to interrupt and make a quick statement. I love what Katie was talking about in terms of places of worship. I think that's so important, but also make sure that you reach out to all places of worship. In other words, don't just pick on maybe the Baptist church or the Methodist church, but also go to those places where there's a mosque or there's a temple. Because one of the things that we found right here in Amarillo is they're often willing to help those people that are in the community that may have language issues. They can go into that temple and they feel comfortable. They're at home. And they also have people that can help with the translation. So make sure that you reach out across all levels of your community. Very good point. Thank you, Katie.
Well, this information here for this may arrange school meetings at a variety of times or conduct in-home conferences between teachers and other educators. We already know from the newbie training we did for Title I annual meeting. We know from the newbie training on the policy that actually having multiple or flexible meetings is a requirement. And it is definitely a best practice to have those meetings in different locations. TEA requires us to have the meetings on a different time and different day. And so we already know that from our perspective, from a Texas perspective, this is really beyond a may. It really is a must. We have to do that. But go on to the next slide, please, Katie. And so you see here just a reminder of what we saw in the policy requirement: offer flexible number of meetings, such as morning and evening meetings. And as I said a moment ago, TEA requires us to have the meetings on different days of the week as well. So different times of the day, different days of the week. We already know that. But next slide, Katie. Is that one thing this slide that really stresses, and I know Terry's talked about it before on other occasions, is that, at least in the trainings that Terry and I have done, is that we want to have our meetings not always at the school building. Obviously, some sorts of trainings need to be at the school. That is the most convenient place to provide a science training, for example. You need to have access to a science lab, perhaps. But there are other kinds of trainings and information that can be done very easily outside of the school building. It can be done, obviously, in a parent's home. You might have a home visit, or you actually might invite a number of families to that home. Also, you might want to, someone just put their headphone or their voice on. Okay, we're good now. Sorry about that. I just could hear an echo. It's odd. Anyway, and so you could have a meeting in a person's home. You could have a meeting at a community center. You have a meeting at a church or place of worship. Be creative about where you might have your meetings in places that are convenient for the families as well. And I did like to comment, I'm not going to go into big detail, but I do like the comment that Claudia offered in the chat, and others have responded, about the idea that if you do provide childcare, even if you have a meeting in a person's home or in a community center, you still might have a place where you're caring for children. Be sure that, Shannon may have said this, be sure you have a person who's qualified or adults who are qualified to care for children. And also, I like what Claudia said, just be aware of the needs of those children, especially if you have special needs children, or like Matthew said, if there's food allergies, we just need to be very careful about the way in which we provide quality of care for our kids in a child care setting.
Skip, I'm going to interrupt again.
Go ahead.
One of the things that I think you need to keep in mind is Skip was talking about moving outside of the school walls. We've at previous trainings have talked about that all parents and sometimes staff as well have luggage that they bring into the job, or the parents have luggage when it comes to their experiences with schools. So one of the reasons it's so important to go out into the community is to build their trust. You want them to trust you enough that they will feel comfortable coming to the school, and that trust will probably never be established until you go outside of the school walls. Another caution that I want to give as we talk about childcare, be sure that whoever that you use, you're entrusting that parent with their most precious gift, their children. So make sure that whoever you use for childcare has been vetted. whatever vetting process that your school uses, that's a critical piece. And especially important if you go out into the community, that you don't just say, okay, anybody that offers can babysit the kids. That can't be the way it's done. You've got to make sure that they're vetted correctly. If your school requires criminal background checks, then all of that has to be done in advance. Thank you, Skip.
I appreciate great information, great insights, and that's what we need to hear. So thank you, Terry. Thank you very much. All right, next slide, please. Also here, we have the option, if you want to call it that, you may adopt and implement model approaches to improving parental involvement. Now that could include things, I want you to go ahead to the next slide first, please. All right, now we know that from the statute, as we talk about the district policy, that they have to do an evaluation and they have to use the findings from that evaluation to establish evidence-based strategies. And so yes, you want to look at your current program, your existing programs, and say, hey, this is working great, and maybe just tweak it up a little bit to improve it. There may be some things you're looking at and saying, this hasn't gone the way we anticipated at all, and you just need to dump it and start over or start with something new. And you want to do that too. But you also might say, hey, there's an area and we need some expertise, some professional assistance that really goes beyond the scope of our ability or even the scope of our time. So we're going to actually then draw upon some expertise. And so you might want to use Boys Town Press type resources. You might want to use Strong Fathers, Strong Families. You might want to use Practical Parent Education. You might want to use eye care. You might want to use parenting leadership. There's a whole range of really, really excellent parenting programs out there. And you might say, hey, we need to invest in that because we're investing in our families. And that's great. So that's tapping into another possibility. But remember, if you do that, you have to make sure that, as Shannon said a little bit ago, you have to make sure that it's a part of the findings in your evaluation process, in your CNA, it's addressed in your CIP, and of course, any financial costs that are incurred have to be in some way included in your budget so that it's approved by TEA. But so when we think about using these best practices, you want to have ingrown or homegrown strategies, as well as implementing some strategies, maybe that are beyond your building, but that are going to add a great amount of strength and really enhance and uplift your program just to that next level. So find ways to introduce best strategies into your school PFE program.
You know, just as Shannon and Skip both mentioned, that you can't just implement something without having a documented need. Establishing a PAC, even though it's not required for you in Title I Part A, it's a great way to be able to have those needs documented because you're receiving that information directly from the parents, and the parents are conveying those needs that they and their children encounter. And this is a way for you to be able to document that it's a need that needs to be addressed. One thing, a lot of you do migrant Title I Part C, and a PAC in migrant is a requirement. So make sure that you're not supplanting one with the other, but this is a great way for you to be able to get information directly from parents that helps you to improve the way that you serve their children in the school, that even improves your parent and family engagement. A PAC in migrant, we use it to help improve and better the way that we serve our migrant students. A parent advisory council for your school is a great way for you to really improve the educational process in your school. So in the next slide, we're going to look at some different processes that you would want to consider as you're trying to develop or start your PAC possibly. So what is your procedure? What is your process to reach out to families to establish a school-wide or district-wide PAC? What are some of the actions that you're going to take? How are you going to communicate with them to invite them to participate in the PAC? Make sure that you're also explaining why you're doing it, what the purpose is, but how it's beneficial to their kids. Just like everybody has mentioned before, every parent wants what's best for their child, and this gives them a great opportunity to really get tied into all of that process and to help teachers be able to do a better job because they're getting that direct feedback from parents. Make sure too that when you're doing this, that you really try hard to get a pack that is comprised of, that reflects your demographic in your school. You don't want to have a school that's, let's say, 40% Caucasian, 40% Hispanic, and 20% African American, and you have 8 Caucasian moms that sit on there. And that's going to be your pack. That's not really representative. And so that might mean that you need to plan pack meeting times that are not at the most convenient times for you as a school. It could be that you have to do some evening or some weekend packs. It could be that you have to experiment with some different locations if parents have transportation barriers. So make sure that you are doing what you can to try to make this available for all parents to participate. And then another thing too is that just to keep it in mind that whenever you schedule PAC meetings, do your very best to try to keep those dates. And we know that life happens. So when you do have to cancel or postpone or move a meeting date, make sure that you're reaching out to your parents and letting them know that the date has changed, the meeting's been canceled, whatever it might be. Give them adequate notice. And also too, make sure that you get in contact with them. Leaving one quick little voicemail or sending a note home with their child, that's not going to cut it. And especially if a parent has already planned to take off from work to attend your meeting, the more times that they get interrupted that way and it affects their family, the less that they're going to be inclined to participate in your PAC. Another thing that we want to look at in the next slide is how do we involve our community? And I love this graphic here because I see these elderly people, they're volunteering, they're helping out. And when I see this, I immediately come back to our best practices expo from last week with mentoring. Grandparents, elderly people, they're great mentors. They're usually a lot more patient than a dad like me when it comes to dealing with kiddos. They have a lot of great life experience that they can share with kiddos. They want to be involved. They want to have a purpose in life. This would be a great way to reach out into your community and try to find ways to get everybody on board. And when they see the needs and they see how they are able to come in and help you meet some of those needs, they're going to help better the whole educational experience for everybody at your school, not just your students, but also your staff and your administrators. So do what you can to try to involve more of your community into your school. And you always have to keep in mind things like the vetting process, background checks, and we understand that. But there are ways to be able to get more people involved in your school. The next slide that we're going to look at, we're going to talk about businesses. When we're talking about really reaching out into your community, we're talking a little bit more about sometimes businesses, because you may, as Shannon mentioned earlier, sometimes your funds are very tight. You don't have a lot of money, but you do have businesses in your area that might be willing to contribute. And something that Terry and Skip had pointed out to me as we were preparing for this is just a little phrase, what's in it for me? That's usually the first question that especially businesses, but oftentimes other people in your community will ask, what is in it for me? Sometimes the best that you can do is sell them on civic pride. But a lot of times they want the best for the kids that graduate from their high schools, that learn in their elementary schools and their middle schools. They want a community that is tighter. A tighter community is a community with less problems oftentimes. So make sure that you understand what are the benefits of having your community involved, because you will need to sell this at a certain point when you're going out and you're reaching out to your communities. Last week, again, in that expo, we looked at Groover ISD and how they got all of these farmers to pitch in little bits. They started with a piece of land that was donated to the school district. And through the efforts of many people in the community, they were able to develop a scholarship program using a section of land. And that scholarship program helps numerous kids in Groover ISD each and every year. While you may not be able to get to that scope in your town, or at least not right away, do what you can to help meet the needs of the schools involving your communities. So that, and when you do that, make sure you recognize those community members who are contributing. In our next slide, we're talking about how do we support our parents. And this is always has to start out with making sure that you're reaching out to them, asking them, what are some ways that we can support you? Sometimes parents, they may tell you about different topics within the school that they'd like to know a little bit more about. They may tell you that some of the activities that you're holding, we don't really participate because they're kind of, they don't meet our cultural differences. They don't speak to us as a culture. Maybe some of the practices that you're engaging in might be offensive to them. So asking parents is a great way to find that out. You may end up having to do 2 different activities to suit or really pacify sometimes 2 different groups of people, but that's something that you might have to take into consideration whenever you're doing that. But again, make sure that you understand the needs of your parents. Ask how you can support them. Because if parents don't feel like they're valued, they're less likely to be involved and engaged in the whole process of their child's education. Our next slide, we're going to just kind of go over again some of the things, surveys, ask for that feedback from families. When you find out those needs, prioritize them. What are the most important needs that we need to address? Find out how you're going to address them through strategies that you're going to implement. Celebrate what works. Hey, if it's good, if it's successful, keep doing it. If it falls short of your goal, reevaluate it. Go back to the drawing board and see what can we do differently next time. But we missed a 4th bullet point on here, and that 4th bullet point is try, try, try. Don't ever stop trying. When you stop trying, you lose that parent and family engagement. So even if something doesn't work out, sometimes parents will look at you and say, hey, but it was a success because you tried. And that means a lot to parents when we try to make sure that they're involved and that they're valuable. Your surveys, we have some different templates on our PFE website that will give you ideas of how you can solicit that information that you need from parents to improve the educational process in your school. And just remember, PFE is customer service for us in the school. The end users of what it is that we're providing are students, but it's also parents, because those kids, that parent wants the very best for them, as Skip mentioned early on, and Terry. We want to make sure that we're providing the best education possible, so we need that information from parents. Okay, in our next slide, we are going to, I'm sorry, we switched up that slide. We're going to be doing a little activity here just to kind of get a better idea of what it is that we've learned today, and it gives you guys the ability to see how well you've learned all of this. So I want you guys to take out your phones. Yes, you're getting permission to play around on your cell phones during our Zoom meeting, and go to kahoot.it. I'm sure many of you have probably used this before, if not in our trainings, probably in some numerous other trainings at different conferences that you've attended. And so when you get into kahoot.it, there is our PIN. It's 759346, and that'll log you in, and you get to create your own fun little name. So we'll give you guys just a few minutes here, or a couple minutes, I'm sorry, to get you logged in. And I always love the creative names that people come up with on some of these. Like ESSA 17, that's so creative, because it's definitely either Cami or Destiny.
We haven't had enough coffee yet.
Okay. Maybe you need to change it, Cami, to needs coffee,
I should.
Maybe you should put in a dummy ESC and say ESC 19 and answer everything wrong and make them look bad.
Or as we learned at a TAA migrant training last year, tell them that you're from region 24. And then nobody knows who it is that you are. Those region 24 people don't know anything. All right, let's go ahead and get started so that we can honor your time in all of this, and you can still jump in. All right, our first question. LEAs in schools must assist parents in understanding state academic standards, state and local assessments, how to monitor their child's progress, or all of the above. And I forgot to mention to those of you that have never done this before that correctness, your accuracy, as well as the speed in which you respond generate more points. All right, so if you'll hit next for us, Katie, up there. Here's our leaderboard. Okay, so let's just keep moving on and let's see how the competition builds here. See some of the cattiness that maybe comes up on here as they start to move up into first. LEAs in schools must provide materials and trainings about Renaissance Accelerated Reader, Google and Microsoft applications, both of the above or none of the above. Remember, LEAs in schools must provide training and materials about. We got one person out there. There we go. None of the above is correct. You are not required to provide those trainings. Okay, so our leaderboard changed just a tiny bit, but first place person is still there. All right, LEAs in schools must build the capacity of teachers, principals, and other school leaders, any staff member that assists with the instruction of Title I students, or all of the above. Got one person holding out on us there. And it's all of the above. We have to build the capacity of everybody involved who is a key player in the education of our students. All right, let's go to the next question. LEAs in schools must coordinate PFE activities when feasible with other programs, integrate transition of both public and private preschool programs, develop parent resource centers, or all of the above. Remember, this is a must. Okay, so it looks like our leaderboard shifts a little bit from second through fifth, but I don't know if it's Cyrene that is number one. They're holding on tight to that lead. All right, next question. This is for double points. LEAs in schools must provide to parents information that is always written in a language the parents can understand, at least English, Spanish, and one other language, in a uniform and understandable format, or all of the above. Remember, LEAs in schools must. So what is it that they must do? This is one question where Skip created it, and we're using some of those test-taking skills that we were all taught as kids in finding your answer. Got a couple more people who are still contemplating their answer. And, oh, Katie jumped too fast. The correct answer on that one was in a language and format. Okay, so I don't know that we can go back to the question, but I've got them. I'm going to go back. Okay, Don't go to that though. So we will cover that here in just a moment. Our last question, again, double points. LEAs in schools must provide which of the following to ensure parent participation? They must, remember again, we're saying that they must provide transportation and childcare costs, conduct in-home conferences, develop district-wide parent advisory councils, or none of the above. LEAs in schools must provide which of the following to ensure parent participation? 3 more people there that are still contemplating what the must is in all of this. LEAs in schools must provide which of the following to ensure parent participation?
We had a couple drop off the call.
And our correct answer is none of the above. I'm sorry. I messed that one up, guys. I selected the wrong box whenever I was creating the Kahoot. The correct answer, which of them must be provided, is none of the above. Okay, so I
Oh, no.
messed up the scores.
Now
on
I
here.
dropped.
None of those are must. Those were all in our maze. They were best practices. So we have our leaderboard, but unfortunately it may not be accurate because, and you guys can just blame me, okay? Just like Cammie, I needed my coffee whenever I created this and didn't get enough apparently on Friday. But we're gonna go back to one of the questions that was in that Kahoot, and it was asking or saying which one was a must as far as communication. Okay, and Skip, if you'll go ahead and cover that question for us, please.
We actually stumbled on 2 different questions. One was LEAs in schools must coordinate PFE activities when feasible with federal, state, and local programs, integrate both public and private preschool programs into the transition process, develop parent resource centers, or all of the above. The correct answer for that particular one is.
Sorry, I'm seeing your email.
Your email's being shared. Oh.
The correct answer is coordinate PFE activities when feasible with federal, state, and local programs. Some people said all of the above, and all of the above is a best practice, but the law never says we have to integrate public and private preschool programs. It just talks about public preschool programs. And the law doesn't say that, well, the statute doesn't say that we must develop parent resource centers. It's a best practice. So it's kind of a trick question. So the most correct answer is coordinate PFE activities. And then LEAs in schools must provide to parents information, always written in a language that parents can understand, at least English, Spanish, or one other language in a uniform and understandable format, or all of the above. And where the people got tripped up there is that we have to provide information to parents in a language and format that that parents understand, but it isn't always going to be written. Sometimes we will use an interpreter. And so, so kind of a really subtle trick question there. Yes, we want to provide services like Matthew already talked about to parents. It doesn't always have to be English, Spanish, or some other language, but obviously it always has to be in a uniform, understandable format. So anyway, y'all did good. Thanks for putting it together, Matthew. If you have a specific question about the questions, just go ahead and ask.
Okay, at this time, I think the next slide was talking about visiting our website. But before we get there, I just want to kind of try to tie this all together and put a bow on it before we leave. One of the things that you see about when you look at building capacity, there is just a lot of, in some ways, repetition, a lot of overlay. So therefore it gets a little confusing. And Skip and I have talked about this in private many times, that the must and the mays almost seem to counteract each other. And so it gets a little bit confusing. So again, just go back and read those laws very carefully. Understand what the musts are and the mays are. Going back again to where Shannon talked about, you must have literacy training. But then over in the may, you may use the funds, your Title I funds, to pay for it. So they often sound very similar, but they have these little nuances that are different that you're just going to have to go back and read over and over and over again. But I will tell you, it's the building capacity pieces that we find the schools aren't being very compliant. And so I anticipate that in the next year or so, that as random validations are being done, that capacity building shalls will probably be looked at more carefully. And again, we want to push those mays. And I want to go back to the very last, and Katie, you don't need to go back. It's no biggie. But one of the things that Matthew talked about at the very, very end was one of the shalls. You had all these shalls, then you had your mays, then it ended on a da-da-da-da-da final shall. And that's, you've got to try to do whatever it is that the parents want, if it's reasonable. And I want to give an example of a program that's become a nationwide program, but that came out of this. A couple of dads started out at a school in California and said, you know what? We're in an unsafe neighborhood. We want to do some things to help. So they created what's called DOGS. DOGS, and it stands for Dads of Great Students. And what these dads do is, there's a multitude of things they do, but one is safety. They're walking around on the outside of those schools, just monitoring the school grounds at all times. They're also, some of those dads are mentors to the other kids, but it's just a program that started because a couple of dads went to the school and made a reasonable request, and now it's a nationwide program. So you try to meet the needs of those parents' requests, but if you don't ask them, you're never going to know what their requests are. So that's part of what the whole capacity building is building that potential of both the staff and the parents. And I want to go back again and talk very quickly about Skip when he's, I think it was Skip, I can't remember. But anyway, the value of the different folks in your community, no, it was Matthew, and retired folks and the difference they can make. I'm telling you, don't lose track of what all that a retired person can bring to the table. One is time, one is experience, but another thing is love. These kids need to be loved on, and nothing better to do that than a nana or a papa. I'm telling you what, they'll come in and they'll love on those kids. And for some kids, that may be the bridge that needs to be built, because when they feel loved, they want to learn. So don't hesitate to reach out. When you're doing this training with your people, have some examples. You don't have to use ours. Think back when you were a teacher. What is it that worked with your parents? You heard us say the same things over and over again. Use your churches, use your community, because you've got to use what you have. And it's always your churches, your community, your businesses, your parents. So you heard us say that over and over again, but be specific when you do your trainings to have some examples. So those are things that are real important. And of course, you can always go to our website. We've talked about that a lot in all of our trainings. And then if you want to go on to the handbook, it's section 6 that talks about the capacity building piece. And then we also have our one-pager on building capacity. That's always good to give out at your trainings, because people get overwhelmed, but a one-pager isn't overwhelming.